Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Note to Self. This is part 4 of my 5-part Unbothered Energy series. So if you haven't checked out the previous 3 episodes, I definitely recommend moving in order. They are juicy ones, they are incredibly valuable, and they're going to really support you in creating the shifts and the integration needed when it comes to embodying unbothered energy. So for today's episode, I'm going to be talking about something that many people underestimate, and that is silence. More specifically, the power of choosing not to respond. And in a world where everyone is reacting to everything all the time, silence has become incredibly rare. And because it's rare, it's powerful. Many people believe power comes from having the perfect response, the perfect argument, or the perfect explanation. But often, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Not because you don't care, not because you're passive, but because you are intentional about where your energy goes. And that is the heart of unbothered energy. Now, let's start with something that happens in almost every conflict. Someone says something that triggers you. Maybe it's criticism. Maybe it's judgment. Maybe it's an unfair comment. Or maybe someone is projecting their stress or their frustration onto you. And the natural instinct is to respond immediately, to defend yourself, to correct them, to explain, to prove your point. But when we react from that place, we often give away more power than we realize. Because the moment someone can pull you into an emotional reaction, they now have influence over your state. They have influence over your mood, your nervous system, your focus. But when someone tries to provoke you and you remain calm, grounded, and measured, their ability to influence you disappears. There is a quote I love that captures this energy perfectly, and that is, "The eagle doesn't circle back to argue with pigeons." Think about that for a moment. An eagle flies high. It sees the entire landscape. It moves with intention and perspective. A pigeon is down on the street, flapping around in the noise and chaos. If an eagle stopped every time a pigeon squawked and tried to argue, it would never stay in the sky. It would lose its altitude. And the same is true for us. When we constantly drop down to defend ourselves against every criticism, every opinion, we lose altitude in our own lives. Unbothered energy is about protecting your altitude. There's an interesting psychological dynamic that happens in moments of conflict. Humans are wired to look for feedback from others. We want to know if our behavior had an impact. So when someone says something provocative and gets an emotional reaction, their brain receives feedback. The reaction reinforces the behavior. But when someone says something and receives no reaction, the loop breaks. Silence removes the reward. This is one of the reasons emotional restraint can be so powerful. It interrupts unhealthy dynamics. Think of silence like removing oxygen from a fire. Many conflicts escalate because both people keep adding fuel. More words, more emotion, more defensiveness. But when one person stops feeding the fire, the intensity often dies down. So not every fire deserves your oxygen. Another important concept here is emotional regulation. When we react immediately, we are usually responding from the emotional centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala, which processes threats and triggers fight or flight responses. But when we pause, even for a few seconds, the prefrontal cortex becomes more active. This is the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, perspective, and thoughtful decision making. In other words, a pause gives your brain time to move from reaction to wisdom. Sometimes silence is simply that pause. Silence can also communicate something powerful without saying a single word. It can say, "I will not engage in this energy. I know who I am. I don't need to defend myself. I am protecting my peace." And when someone consistently chooses calm over reaction, people begin to recognize something about them. They are not easily shaken. They are not easily pulled into chaos. And that kind of emotional stability commands respect. Now, silence doesn't mean you never speak up. There are times when communication is important. There are times when boundaries need to be expressed. There are times when conversations need to happen. But the key difference is intentional response versus emotional reaction. When you choose silence first, you create space. Space to think, space to regulate, and space to decide what actually deserves your energy. And there is a deeper truth here. When you feel the need to respond to everything, it often comes from a belief that you must control how others see you. But as we discussed in the last episode, you cannot control every interpretation. And once you release that need, you become much more selective with your responses. Not everything requires your voice. Some things only require your awareness. Think of your attention like a spotlight on a stage. Whatever the spotlight shines on becomes the focus of the entire room. When you give something your attention, you give it energy, you give it importance, you give it life. So when you choose not to shine your spotlight on something unnecessary, it fades into the background. Silence is often just redirecting your spotlight. And before we close today, I want to leave you with a simple practice that you can start using. So the next time someone says something that triggers you, try something very small but very powerful. Pause. Take one slow breath and ask yourself, is responding right now going to improve this situation? If the answer is yes, respond calmly and intentionally. And if the answer is no, allow yourself to stay silent. And you may be surprised how often silence protects your peace. And the more you practice this, the more you train your nervous system to remain steady in moments that previously would have pulled you into reaction. This is how unbothered energy is built, one pause at a time. And I just want to circle in for a moment around the experience of practicing this. So practice, right? It's not always going to be perfect. You might hear this episode today and think, yes, this really clicked for me. This is what I am going to do. We are all human. We all have programs that are running, and perhaps a lot of those have been on autopilot. So be gentle with yourself. If you catch yourself in a reaction, or if you catch yourself reacting emotionally to something, the next trigger that comes up, let's say, the next conflict that arises, as soon as you remember, pause, right? If you had just had a reaction, pause and start to just remind yourself, it's okay. I'm learning and I don't have to be perfect at this. And what I will tell you is that the more that you do practice this, even if you catch yourself, let's say mid-conflict, mid-disagreement, and you decide to practice this, practice the pause, practice regulating yourself, maintaining your peace, you're doing a lot of really great work. So just know that it will come natural to you, but it just takes applying it a few times. So, one pause at a time. And in the final episode of this series, I'm going to talk about what it really means to become the calm in the storm. Because being unbothered is not about suppressing emotions or pretending nothing affects you. It's about learning how to process emotions in healthy ways so that they don't control your behavior. And when you master that skill, you move through life very differently, more grounded, more clear, and more powerful. So, thank you for being here with me on Note to Self. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need this reminder today. And remember this, the eagle doesn't circle back to argue with pigeons. Not every moment deserves your response. Some moments deserve your silence. And I'll see you all in part 5.